Okay. The next time you are in one of those virtual professional settings where you are staring at a bunch of faces, go back, go back. I'll tell you when to go. The next time you are in one of those virtual professional settings where you are staring at a bunch of faces you don't know, and you have to do that awkward thing where you all introduce yourself, ask each person to finish their introduction by naming their special ocean place. Yesterday's meeting repeatedly evoked memories of my special ocean place, Ojan Beach on the southern end of Saipan, the island in the Western Pacific where I am from. Every time one of you spoke about purple urchin harvesting or removal, I flashed back to my childhood and my father teaching me how to gather sea urchins on the reef flat during low tide. He convinced me when I was about 8 years old that I was the world's greatest sea urchin hunter, that nobody did it better in the history of the Chamorro people. For years, this inspired me to gather sea urchins on my own and to deliver them to my aunties and my uncles sitting on the beach. Tom Sawyer had white paint and a fence, and my father had a reef flat full of tasty critters. Everyone on this call and people we work with in our chosen profession all have similar stories of their special ocean places. They often invoke memories of family, childhood, culture, and identity, and this connection is often missing from the modern conservation movement. Good afternoon. My name is Angelo Villagomez, and as always, I am grateful for the chance to stand with people who care deeply about the ocean. Over the past 25 years, I've worked at the intersection of science, policy, and community, helping designate marine national monuments, advocating for the protection of 30% of the ocean, contributing to the MPA guide, talking with leaders, and trying to be useful wherever ocean issues and Indigenous issues overlap. Today, I want to talk to you all about conservation success. How is it measured? When does it count? Who gets to decide that? And what are our metrics for access, equity, and quality? I also want to try to insert kelp into this talk and frame that discussion around how our ways of measuring conservation success are changing and how Indigenous knowledge, that's place-based, community-held knowledge, can guide us into the next decade. And I'll tell you up front, I am not a kelp scientist. I know the least about kelp of anyone on this call. I'm a diver who loves being in kelp forests. I'm a policy person who learns from scientists and fishermen and elders. And I'm someone who believes Indigenous values aren't just something we remember, they're something we use today. So apologies in advance when my brain gets tangled up in the kelp. All right, now next slide. I was born in a village on an island next to the Mariana Trench. Just wanted to show you a typical scene from my childhood. So you just go ahead and click through 4 times. But today I work for an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Center for American Progress. Much of my career has been focused on marine protected areas and shark protections, and I've been an advocate for protecting 30% of the ocean for more than 20 years. The effort to protect 30% of the ocean is sometimes referred to as 30 by 30. We heard about this already, because some people hope to accomplish this by 2030. But way back in 2005, elected leaders in the Western Pacific committed to effective conservation of 30% of our nearshore resources around our islands with what we deemed the Micronesia Challenge. For the last 2 decades, our islands have been asking questions like, what is effective management? What counts? What doesn't count? And when does it count? So while I have my own professional interests and research projects, in my role at the Center for American Progress, when new issues around ocean and Indigenous peoples arise, I work with policymakers, elected officials, and communities all across the United States to help navigate those issues. Next slide. And that's how I find myself in front of all of you today. Most of, actually perhaps all of, my professional kelp experience has been through engagement with the Kelp Forest Alliance, led by my good friend Aaron, who we're about to hear from. I've worked with Aaron and the partners at KFA for about 2 years now, mainly with a focus on how to engage Indigenous partners in kelp conservation and restoration globally. Next slide. I come to this work not just as someone who reads the science or writes the policies, but as a Chamorro person whose identity is shaped by my special ocean places. My worldview comes from a place where the sea is not a backdrop. It is home, a relative, a teacher. That shapes how I think about kelp, about conservation, and about the future of this movement. Click. This is a vestige of the last presentation. That's just a picture of me and Aaron and Lynn in the Channel Islands last year. Next slide. All right. So for the last 20 years, my corner of the ocean conservation world has looked like this. Click. That area marked off as an oval is a marine protected area or an MPA. According to IUCN, an MPA is a clearly defined geographical space recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values, and just click. And typically with an MPA, you're trying to address acute threats, things like overfishing, or maybe oil drilling or deep sea mining. Next slide. The number of MPAs around the world since the turn of the century have grown faster than the population of purple sea urchins in the Channel Islands. This is a graph of the growth of marine protected areas in square kilometers this century. The data is taken from the World Database on Protected Areas. For most of the 2000s and into the 2010s, it was a very common reframe that we've only protected less than 1% of the ocean. But that hasn't been true for some time now. The total area of global marine protections is inching up to 10%, but it's nowhere near 30%. Still, this has been a 10 times increase in the area of protected ocean all around the world in the last 25 years. That is a huge accomplishment. Next slide. Next, click again. All right, there you go, thank you. This has led to increased ambitions globally. Perhaps you heard the news of the High Seas Treaty coming into force over the weekend. And up until a year ago, these ambitions were shared in the United States. The Biden administration had their own version of a 30 by 30 goal, and NGO partners were working together like never before to advance it. Most countries today have a domestic commitment to something like 30 by 30, or follow the 30 by 30 commitment that was made at the CBD in 2022. Next slide. Don't click just yet. I'll tell you when to click. But 30 by 30 has strengths and weaknesses. On the one hand, it's incredibly easy to remember and communicate. Funders fund it, political leaders love it, and it's inspiring for many people around the world. Now, go ahead and click. But in the United States, and this is a map of all of the protected areas around the country, if you were to draw an imaginary line between Hawaii and the West Coast, you would have 99% of the people living to the right of that line, yet 99% of the marine protected areas are to the left of that line. This is not just a mismatch prioritizing which habitats get protected, it's also a mismatch in who is forced to carry the burdens of conservation and of who reaps the benefits. That's not specifically the purpose of this talk, but it's a large part of the work that I do at the Center for American Progress. Next slide, and then click again. So what has been left behind in the 30 by 30 movement, and I think there's 3 pictures here, so just click through, are nearshore habitats. Nearshore habitats are incredibly important. They punch above their weight when it comes to biodiversity protection, when it comes to preventing storms and flooding, when it comes to pollution controls and economic benefits, and when it comes to carbon sequestration. They're also super important. But they have a very small footprint and can be overlooked by conservation efforts, which are focused on racking up large gains towards 30 by 30. Next slide. And then just click through as I talk. Not only do they punch above their weight, but nearshore ecosystems are also some of the most threatened ecosystems in our country. We've lost 7% of seagrass meadows globally, 2% of kelp forests globally. I expect you to fact check me on that one. And 80,000 acres of coastal wetlands in the US alone. Next slide. I'm going to speed through this really quick, just because this is the part I wanted to cut out after hearing everything that you said yesterday. But in traditional conservation, you may have a place, maybe it's fished, click, and you remove the fishing threat by designing, implementing a protected area, click, the fishing pressure is removed, and boom, more fish. Next slide. But nearshore is going to be different, especially if it's in a place that has lots of people nearby, click. There's going to be some of these non-acute threats that are coming, click, please, that are coming from outside of the borders, and they're just going to have to be addressed slightly differently. And you all talked about this at great length yesterday, so I don't need to convince you. The work you do is much more complicated than protecting massive marine monuments in the Western Pacific, because you have to deal with more complicated political and social dynamics, complicated governance systems. Like we heard some about what it takes to get a science permit in California these days. It's a nightmare. And you're also dealing with unique threats not addressed by MPAs. Next slide. Maybe one more time. Oh, there you go. All right. So after yesterday's talks, I don't think I need to convince any of you that achieving healthy, sustainable nearshore areas requires conservation goals that go beyond acreage. Next slide. But we live in this 30 by 30 conservation moment. So how do we adapt 30 by 30 to meet the needs of nearshore habitats and communities? This is where I think special ocean places can come in. My working hypothesis is that all around this great country are people who love the ocean and have special ocean places. Nearly 40% of Americans live near the coast, so the potential for a large constituency is huge. I believe that there are people all around this country who love oyster reefs, people who love seagrass habitats, beaches and dunes, salt marshes, coastal wetlands, coral reefs, and yes, kelp forests. I know that this gathering probably wouldn't believe me when I tell you that kelp conservation is not a national priority right now. Yet Jeff Whitty told us yesterday that there are 88 kelp projects in Washington state alone. There's so much good work happening across the country with kelp and with other nearshore habitats that I've identified. So how do we do a better job of prioritizing this work in national and global efforts? Next slide. Click again. Click again. All right, one more time. Get it all out. One more time. I'll go back. All right, there we go. Thank you. To answer this, CAP does what we do, which is we write memos. We started with a survey, which I know some of the people on this call participated in. We reached out to legislators, scientists, conservation practitioners, community leaders, NGOs. Even the Lieutenant Governor of Guam was one of our respondents. And we asked basically two questions. We asked what is already being done, and then what are the ingredients to success? Next slide. We focused on 6 habitats because these are places with high biodiversity. They're also important for cultural and economic reasons, and many of them have good examples of existing policies and programs. And there's a lot of national success already, and that's about all I'll say. I encourage you to read at least the executive summary to see the broad arguments that we're making for redefining conservation success with nearshore progress. Next slide. So for most of my career, conservation success has often been measured in square miles or square kilometers if you're in Canada. I helped advance 30 by 30. I'm proud of that work. Big protected areas and remote places have incredible ecological and cultural value. But kelp conservation forces us to confront a reality we've been avoiding. You can't creatively account your way to a healthy ecosystem. A line drawn on a map does not automatically cool the water or reduce urchin pressure or improve stormwater management. And when conservation becomes a numbers game, we risk protecting what is easy to count, not what is essential to protect. Nearshore habitats like kelp are small. They're messy. They sit inside complicated jurisdictional mosaics, city beaches, stolen tribal waters, state fisheries, federal permits. They require coordination, not just designation. I'm not suggesting that we totally walk away from area targets, but rather to point out that with 30 by 30, we're missing the kelp forest for the fronds. Many of my MPA Guide scientist colleagues will point out correctly that the highest biological outcomes for fish are associated with no-take protected areas. But we also have the work of David Gill and others who highlight that the most effective protected areas are the ones with staff and funding. It seems elementary, but a no-take protected area with no local community support and no local funding results in 0 biological outcomes or worse. Barbara Horta Acosta, she's doing similar work to show that it's not just about implementing protected areas, it's about implementing them well over a long period. But how do we measure that? And how do we put that on a bumper sticker? Next slide. As I mentioned before, for the last 2 years, I've worked with Kelp Forest Alliance, who are leading a working group at NCEAS. Our working group is looking at creating a kelp forest restoration site selection tool using ecological, social, and economic data to ensure resilient and equitable restoration. We have met twice in person since 2023, with last year's meeting focusing on Indigenous peoples and knowledge. We have members of our group from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Namibia, Chile, United States, and Canada. Our data and conversations from that meeting are not yet published, but I do want to share with you some of those discussions. I also want to recognize the tribal work we learned about yesterday, taking place up and down the West Coast. Maybe there are some parallels between the discussions in those communities and what we talked about with our international partners. So we talked a lot about respect. In Chamorro, we say respetu. In Maori, they say wakaute. Respect means we begin by understanding what the community needs, not what we think they need. Sometimes their priorities are not kelp. They may need stormwater upgrades first. They may need safer access to the water. They may need better fisheries monitoring or youth programs. Respect means we start where people are, not where our grant proposals want them to be. We also talked a lot about reciprocity. Another central value for Chamorros is chenchule. And in Maori, the word is manakitanga. It means reciprocity, interconnectedness, taking care of each other. In practice, that means we don't helicopter into communities with solutions that are prepackaged. We bring decision makers to the tide pools, not the other way around. We support restoration in ways that create jobs, not just reports. And we make kelp visible in everyday life through food, art, education, because people protect what they recognize. And finally, we talked a lot about responsibility. In Chamorro, the word is anafamaulik, which translated literally means doing good. In Maori, it's takohanga. It's the responsibility to restore harmony. That means understanding livelihoods, not undermining them. It means compensating people fairly. It means confronting histories of colonization, even when it's uncomfortable, and not pretending that those histories don't shape today's conservation outcomes. And it means learning from the past. We don't restore ecosystems by forgetting what came before. We restore them by remembering. These three values aren't philosophical. They're practical. They tell us how to manage urchins respectfully, how to engage youth meaningfully, how to make kelp restoration a community project rather than an academic one. They remind us that conservation is not only about ecosystems, it's also about relationships with nature, but also with each other. If we take these values seriously, respect, reciprocity, and responsibility, what then does kelp conservation look like in the next decade? And how do we measure that? All right, next slide. I'm almost done. I started this talk by invoking our special ocean places and how that connection is missing from the metrics used to measure success in the modern conservation movement. Invoking the indigenous values I just shared, I'll end my talk by reminding us that there is an inherent reciprocity in special ocean places. Special ocean places also need special ocean people. Dr. Ashita Voss is a whale biologist in Sri Lanka, whom I greatly admire, and she is prone to say that every coastline needs a hero. She follows this up with, protecting the world's biggest habitat is going to need the world's biggest team. What does this look like? All of the people who spoke during yesterday's 25 presentations are ocean heroes working to protect special ocean places. How do we articulate the intangible and immeasurable metrics of all of that success? Area targets are not new, and I don't think they are going away either. In the 1971 book, which I had to read in college, the book is called Encounters with the Archdruid. It's about David Brower. There are repeated references to protecting 10% of nature. This is like from the 1960s, which was 200 years ago. But on social media right now, a lot of people are reminiscing about 2016 for some weird reason. I do not understand. But if you could get in a time machine and go back 10 years to 2016, influential people were already talking about the post-2020 conservation framework. Today, we are just as far away from 2030 as we were from 2020 back then, but almost nobody is talking about the post-2030 framework. Around the same time, in the climate world, we used to talk about 350 parts per million. Today, we don't hear anybody really talking about 350, in part because we blew by it years ago. Now, most of the messaging is around the Paris Agreement and 1.5 degrees. Did you notice when that change happened? And I had to say this to say that conservation targets change all the time and we don't even notice it. But area targets are having a moment, but just like 350, I think that moment will pass. We will continue to use area targets, but we will talk about them differently and we will prioritize them differently. And this should not be threatening to funders, to NGOs, or to scientists. There has always been an ebb and flow of conservation messaging. The American conservation movement was born out of scenic landscapes so that Ansel Adams would always have places to take pretty pictures for Teddy Roosevelt. It evolved with the land ethic and Aldo Leopold, and again with Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. When I was a young man, our messages were about save the rainforest and save the whales. Climate change became a very prominent topic in the 2000s, and equity and justice was important for a few years post-George Floyd in the 2020s. So at its core, 30 by 30 is just today's way of saying that we need more conservation, we need better conservation, and we need that conservation to happen sooner. And I'm not sure I'm going to say this next bit in the most strategic way possible, but nearly all of the global targets set by international bodies are way off track. We are probably not going to achieve 30 by 30, and yet that does not mean that we stop striving towards it or thinking about what will come after it, just as we should not stop saying that we will strive to end war, extreme poverty, and inequality. Global targets are ideals, something to strive for. They are based on our values, informed by science. But the way we articulate those values evolves, and the way we measure that success changes. The only time I heard 30 by 30 invoked yesterday was during Tristan's talk about her work in Mendocino. But in many of your talks yesterday, and in your descriptions of your conservation interventions, the area bounded as study sites and control sites was described. But the sum of that area was the least important measurement that you took. What mattered more were the conservation outcomes. When Annie finished Jan's presentation yesterday, on the last slide, it read, different communities, different approaches. I've heard before that purple sea urchin removal isn't scalable or durable, but in yesterday's presentations, I got the impression that every other community from Baja to the Salish Sea is figuring out how to do just that, or learn if and how it would work for them. And ultimately, that's where ocean conservation success is going to be defined. It's people like you with your special ocean places acting like ocean heroes. Sijus Mase, and thank you. And I guess we'll answer questions after we hear the other presentations. And now I'm going to read all the chat.